The last time we were together, we were talking about, I had talked about looking at marriage in a new way. I had to drag out the notes because it escaped my memory. And what I wanted to really get across to you in that lesson, I won't bother to go back through it, but it's the predecessor for tonight. And what's really been on my heart is that when you get saved, you have entered the realm as a spiritual creature. And I've talked about this many times. And because you're now, the Holy Spirit inhabits you, you've entered a realm, the kingdom realm. The kingdom is here and now, by the way. It's not something that we're waiting to see when we pass on. The kingdom is here and now. You have entered a realm where you have taken on the responsibility to live a different way. Okay, and Paul takes great pains in the New Testament to point out, look, prior to being saved, you can't understand it. Once you're saved, all of a sudden, there's a lot of new things going on. And it presents, the bottom line is, it means it's a completely different way to live. And this is called the process of sanctification, where we are over our lifetime, Jesus is working with us as you pursue him, and he changes you. You begin to feel differently, and you'll hear strange things that before you were saved made no sense at all. But over time, after you've gotten saved, it begins to make sense. And one of my favorites is, you want to get out of debt? Give your way out of debt. Because God's economy works differently. And we have a different way of approaching life. And you have different priorities in your life. You basically have three things to do just by you being you. You influence, you evangelize, and you disciple just by you being you. So with that as an introduction, I think it's important that if we're going to bear fruit for the kingdom, which is emphasized a lot in the New Testament, you have to understand how the kingdom works. And it works in a way, again, that we're not accustomed to in the natural. Totally differently. And was it Jesus said? Yeah, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. Why? Because it's different. It's a different way to approach life. And I'm giving you some terms here in the notes. Author, which comes from the Latin auctorum, to increase or augment. It basically means one who causes to grow, or one who creates the conditions for growth. There's another word that takes on a different meaning, submission. We think of submission as putting ourselves under Jesus, or putting ourselves, and it does have that meaning. But the way the New Testament puts it, Greek heptasso means to line up under, to support. So in other words, in a marriage, like I was talking about a couple of weeks ago, the husband is the authority, which means he is responsible for creating the conditions for growth. The wife submits, but it's a totally different way. She is an equal partner, but the way submission is used, it's like a concrete foundation holding up the rest of the structure. And so we enter into this relationship, this authority and submission relationship, because you have to have both to contribute to growth for the kingdom. We bless. And what blessing means, we have this notion that to bless means to give money, or you get something real nice. It's something good. But what it really means in Old Testament usage, it comes from the word barak, to kneel or kneel in front of or to kneel before. What it means is, whose authority are you going to submit to? Whose authority are you going to submit to? So it's interesting, if you notice the definition here, it's also to curse. So they mean basically they're polar opposites of one another. And then a word that I like to use, I use it a lot, shalom. Basically what shalom means is to take control over chaos. It basically refers to an inner completeness and tranquility. Y'all remember, it's appropriate season for it. Do y'all remember many years ago, there was a kid, he and his two buddies were playing out on a pond, actually a small lake, and he went through the ice, and they rescued him. He had been under for 20 minutes. Breakthrough, yeah. They took him to the hospital, and his mother did something really interesting. She said, she got real frustrated with everybody around him, like, what's going to go wrong? How, he's not going to make it, this, that, and the other thing. And she finally just said, look, I'm putting my foot down. When you come into this room, you are to say positive things only. And then she came up with this word, and I had heard it before, but not in this context. She talked about shalom, bringing peace where there's chaos, bringing healing where there's illness. And that kid survived. He was out of the hospital in 3 weeks. She had a couple of really interesting visions, which I don't have time to go into. So what I want to get onto is bearing fruit for the kingdom. That's why we're here. That's why we're here. We bear fruit for the kingdom by influence, evangelizing, and discipleship. That's fruit for the kingdom. You're changing people by you being you. God has put you in positions of influence with people around you. And it's important how you exercise that influence. Now, when we talked about the authority and submission dynamic, this is the fundamental fruit-bearing cycle that God employs in the natural. But he uses spiritual creatures living in natural bodies, that's us, to bear fruit. And it works. The authority submission dynamic, and I'm going to get into specifics here in a second so it'll make sense. It's two parties working in tandem to create a mutually satisfying atmosphere in which growth can occur. Hopefully that's a husband and a wife. When they bear children and they're influencing them. And hopefully along the line they'll evangelize to them or somebody else will. And then they disciple them as they go. The authority, the husband, invites the submitter. Well, I'll get into it. The authority invites the submitter. The authority blesses the submitter. Blessing is a spiritual command, again, to kneel or kneel in front of. In other words, to bring everything under God's authority. To put it all together. You'll see it in just a sec. But here's important. The authority is dependent on the submitter. Because if you don't have true submission, you can't have authority. All you'll have is chaos. So without a submitter, there's no authority and no growth. The submitter is dependent on the authority for guidance, direction, and care. That is to say, through the blessing. The blessing is what confers this. Without loving and tender care by the authority, the submitter will retreat or rebel from authority, the conditions for bearing fruit will not be met. Okay, page 2. This will make sense in a sec. Now, Ephesians tells us that husbands and wives are to submit one to another to accomplish the mission of influence, evangelizing, and discipleship. The naming process is what establishes the relationship. And we're going to get into this in just a minute. Where am I now? The authority submission logistic is all about growth of the kingdom. That's where it all takes place. The authority creates the conditions for growth. The authority blames and names the submitter. The submitter honors the authority, and the submitter supports the authority. And again, without submission, there can be no growth. Now, I'm going to skip down a little bit here, so this will start coming together. Paul outlines 4 lines of authority and submission in the natural. There's the family, there's government, there's the church, and employment. And you have to understand how this works. Now, one of the things that I find real interesting, and I certainly used to do this until it was pointed out to me, we're all going to be put into situations where we're going to be confronted with choices. We have to submit to sinners. When you go to work, is your boss perfect? Yeah. You guys aren't helping. But when we go to work, depending on who we're working for, we're submitting to an unfair, sinful individual. And I know that because I worked for enough of them. We are also being asked to coexist with sinners. Now, Kathy has the sheer pleasure of living with me for 41 years, and she's living with a sinner. And yes, she has. So we can either submit to sinners, we can coexist with sinners, or we can rebel against sinners. And how we cope with these, the choices we make, depending on how we integrate them as we walk through them, that we learn how to bear fruit for the kingdom. Is this making sense? Hopefully. Page 3. The family line of authority and submission. We have the father, the mother, and we have children. I've got a little bit of time, so I can get into something in just a minute. The husband is the authority. Why? Now, most people, most Christians, in fact, the vast majority of Christians, don't really know why the husband is an authority. And they'll come up with all kinds of, well, in most cases, he's certainly not smarter. But why are husbands an authority? Why are husbands? And I'm getting a lot of puzzled faces. Good. He's a seed sower. Marriage must be consummated, so the husband sows the seed. She is the seed receiver. What else happens at the wedding? Name giver. She takes the name. Kathy, for better or worse, took the name Marika. All of a sudden, we became something different in the spiritual arena. So the husband is the authority. He's the seed sower and the name giver. The wife is a submitter to the authority of the husband. She supports his authority. And thus we have the relationship. The receiving of the name creates the relationship, and the covenant that they agree to designates the marital relationship as exclusive, unique, and total. The two of them together, they are still uniquely individuals, but they have become something altogether different. They are now a copy of the Trinity in the spiritual realm. So if you get that, you got most of this. The husband blesses the wife. If you're a husband, you're not blessing your wife, big mistake. And praying shalom over your union. The wife honors the husband. The husband and wife are mutually influential. And what happens? When children are born, what happens? They bestow a name. I learned a long time ago that if, when I'm telling Kathy about, if so-and-so, the couple had a baby, well, you got to get the vital statistics. Okay, male, female, length, weight, and maybe APGAR score if that's given to you. But then the name. It's interesting. It's kind of awkward when somebody comes to you and they tell you, oh, we got a dog this weekend. What's the initial question you want to ask? Why? Because you were the one who gave them the name. Okay? Which signifies they are yours in every respect. So the parents are the name givers. That establishes their spiritual authority over those children. The parents bless the children. The children are submitted to the parents. The children honor the parents. Now, what is this all leading to? Your job as a parent is to do what? Take care of them and to do what? Prepare them to become parents. Or, alternatively, you can say, you are preparing them to become authorities in their own right. And submitters in their own right. That's one of the fundamental things we're teaching our kids. Are you teaching them to be authorities or submitters? What are you teaching them? How to operate within that dynamic. Where am I here? The parents bless the children. The children are submitters to the parents. The children honor the parents, hopefully. The parents prepare the children to become authorities or submitters and or they are preparing the children to be fruit-bearing vessels. Does this make sense? You starting to see how this works? No, you're not. You have to understand, God has a plan. We're not just thrown together. We're not just thrown together and hopefully things will turn out right. God's got a structure, and it's an authority submission structure. So we have to learn how to act within it. And page 4. Now, lest you think, when we go to work for somebody, we have, in Ephesians, it talks about the master-servant line of authority, which is supervisor, employee, or teacher and student. Both work the same. The master blesses the servant. The employer should be blessing the employee. The master names the servant's position. When you take a job, how do you know what you're supposed to do? They tell you what to do, but what's the first thing that happens? They hire you, and then what do they tell you? What your job is, what your job title is, right? So he names the position. He or she, the master, names the position. You, as the employee, you honor the employer, the master. You honor him because if you don't, A, you're not going to last there real long, but growth can't occur. Growth cannot occur. The servant accepts the name of the position. Are you willing, we want to offer you a job as a clerk. Are you willing to accept that? Yeah, I'll accept that. So you accept that name, which designates your rank in the organization. Now, when I learned how to do public speaking, the man's name was Ray Schnell, and he was very good. And the way he taught us how to public speak, he had a real unique way of doing it. Most people don't like to get up in front of a group, in front of a crowd. And Ray had figured out how to teach this. And what he would do is, we would sit in a circle, and we had topics we had to talk about. And then after a while, we'd just sit there getting comfortable with one another. And then Ray would say, you start talking, Ray would say, stand up. And really, public speaking is no more than talking standing up. You and I could be carrying on this conversation one-on-one or two-on-one, whatever it is, but it's really no different. It's really no different. And he asked a very important question. One of the things we had to talk about that night, what's the most important thing that a supervisor does? He supervises. Very good. Suppose you get hit by a bus. You're the supervisor. Does business stop? Hopefully not. But what has to happen? You got to train a replacement. That's the most important function of a supervisor. Make sure somebody knows how to take charge if he or she isn't there. So the master prepares the servant to be the master. And the master prepares the servant to be a fruit-bearing vessel. It's through that relationship that fruit is born. The same thing happens with the church. The pastors and elders and deacons are the authorities. Actually, the congregation is. But the way it functionally works is the pastor blesses the congregants. And Dave does with us. So the congregants are the submitter to the authority of the pastor. If they don't, can growth occur? No, because there's the authority and submission relationship hasn't been established. If they're constantly rebelling against him, one of the reasons why it works the way it does is because we honor Dave and Dave blesses us. And fruit is being born, hopefully. The pastor prepares the congregants to become the authorities. Dave has often said, if something were to happen to him, he's got at least 6 or 8 people around here who could assume responsibility. So the pastor prepares the congregants to be fruit-bearing vessels. The government citizen line of authority, and hopefully this occurs, but not, unfortunately we know now it doesn't really too much anymore. But the officials are the authority. The officials set the rules. Although we have a constitution, but you get the idea. The officials bless the citizens. They should, but they don't. The citizens are hopefully true submitters, which in many cases are not. Look at Minnesota. The citizens honor the officials, whether they like it or not. But truly, if they don't really honor the authorities, no growth can occur. And the officials prepare the citizens to become the officials. Hopefully, what's happening in a government citizen line of authority is that people are learning how, and eventually learn how to rise up through the ranks, run for office, what have you. But the thing is, what we have to understand is what you've entered into when you got saved. You entered into an authority submission relationship with Jesus Christ. We are here to evangelize. We are here to disciple. We are here to, I forgot the third one. We are here to instruct and influence. That's why we're here. And a lot of times, if things aren't working out for you, one of the things you need to ask yourself is, am I truly submitting in this situation? Or am I truly raising up a true influencer? Because we have to understand this is the way the kingdom works. I know this lesson's been difficult, but we're going to cover this more. So we start getting the idea. What this gets around to saying is, in conclusion, you have to understand how God's kingdom works. It's much more than just, it's you being you, and you submitting to Jesus Christ and letting Christ work in you, so that over time you become a greater and greater influencer, an evangelist and discipler. But you have to understand how it works and how you fit into this. It's so much more than just looking good and making sure you're doing all the right stuff, or making sure I'm going to volunteer for this because it's good, and that's good stuff. But are you thinking in terms of influence, evangelism, or discipleship? And are you thinking in terms of how is this helping the kingdom to grow? I just had something happen over the last couple weeks while we were sequestered. We I run the seminary, the day-to-day operations of it. And all of a sudden, what pops out is, at 3 different institutions, we have 3 different individuals who are getting ready to proceed to get their doctorates. They're becoming influencers. And they're going to influence others by doing this, because each one of them wants to establish their own seminary within the prison walls. And we have 2 more already doing that. So God is using this church, because I certainly could have never set this up by my own, but it was here waiting for me when I got here. And now God is using me, using you all to set this up. Pretty soon we're going to have, probably within the next year, 5 prison seminaries turning out influencers, evangelizers, and disciplers. See, that's how it works. And he would use me for something like that. I wasn't prepared for this, but I'm learning how to do it. But he's using me to influence, and praise God for that. Are there any other questions?